The Montana wilderness was a cruel, beautiful thing, and Willadorine was about to tame it. She stood on her 40 acres of dirt and rock, a carpet bag in one hand, $8 in the other. Enough to starve, but not enough to quit. Beneath her heart, a secret was growing, a child that would soon announce her shame to the world. It had been 3 months since she'd run from Boston, run from the silk and the whispers, from the life that was supposed to be perfect. She could still hear her husband, Charles, his voice like shattered ice. "I won't raise another man's bastard." The lie of it burned in her gut. The child was his. Of course it was his, but his pride was a fortress, and her words couldn't get through. So she let him believe it. Let him wallow in his righteous fury. The truth didn't live in Boston parlors. It lived here, in the calloused skin of her hands, hands that would have sent her finishing school teachers into a dead faint. Willa hefted her father's old axe. The weight of it felt good. It felt real. She swung it at the nearest lodgepole pine, the thud of the blade echoing in the vast silence. Each swing was a punch to the face of the helpless woman she was supposed to be. Each fallen tree was a tombstone for her old life. The cabin foundation rose from the earth, stone by heavy stone, hauled from a creek bed that seemed 1,000 miles away. Her shoulders screamed in protest. She ignored them. The frame went up, beam by stubborn beam. Her hands bled. They healed. They bled again. Then one day, a shadow fell over her work. He sat on a horse so fine it was probably worth more than her entire life. Tall in the saddle, with dark eyes that took in everything at once, her half-built cabin, the neat stacks of lumber, and finally her, pregnant and covered in sawdust. His face was a mask of pure shock. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. He tipped the brim of his hat. "I'm Hob Ransom. My family owns the Circle R, about 10 miles north of here." His gaze flickered over her work again. "Quite an undertaking you have here." Willa straightened up, the hammer in her hand feeling suddenly heavier. Sawdust clung to her hair like a strange kind of lace. "Willadorine," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Good morning, Mr. Ransom." His eyes kept finding their way to her rounded belly. It was impossible to hide. "Building a cabin is hard work," he said, stating the obvious, even for a man with a full crew. "I find most things worth having require hard work," she shot back. "I don't mind the effort." Something changed in his expression then. Not pity, something else. Respect, maybe, or just plain confusion. He was trying to fit her into a box. Fallen woman, desperate widow, runaway wife. But she was breaking all his boxes. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, his voice softer now. "But I wanted to make sure everything was all right. Winter comes early in these parts. You're a long way from help." "I have no husband," Willa said, the words sharp enough to cut. She wanted him to know. She wanted him to leave. "And my family back east prefers I remain a distant memory." The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid. She could see him turning it over in his mind, this puzzle of a woman building a fortress in the middle of nowhere. "For what it's worth," he said at last, "what you're doing here, it takes considerable courage. Not many would have the backbone to start over in a place like this." Before she could think of a reply, he'd turned his horse, melting back into the aspen trees as silently as he'd arrived. He left her standing there, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Hob Ransom was a complication. He was exactly the kind of complication she'd run a continent to escape. But as she picked up her hammer, she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd be back. And a small, treacherous part of her found itself listening for the sound of hoofbeats. The secret she carried felt like a hot brand against her skin. She was still married. Charles had never filed the papers. He'd just thrown her out. In the eyes of the law, she was Mrs. Charles Whitmore, and she had a terrible feeling that Hob Ransom, the wealthy rancher's son, had his own secrets. A man like that didn't just happen upon a lone woman in the wilderness by accident. He was here for a reason, and she was terrified to find out what it was. The first snow came without warning, a fine white powder that turned the world silent and beautiful and deadly. Willa's breath plumed in the air. Her cabin was almost done. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the stone chimney she'd built with her own 2 hands. But winter in Montana was a different kind of beast, a hungrier beast. Hob Ransom started showing up more often. He had a 6th sense for when she was in over her head. He'd appear just as she was trying to wrestle a heavy log into place, or when she was stretching just a little too far to nail a stubborn board. This morning, he found her on the roof. She was laying the last of the shingles, her movements slow and deliberate. The frost made the wood slick as glass. The baby inside her had grown heavy, throwing her balance off. "Miss Doreen!" His voice was sharp with alarm. He swung down from his horse before it had even stopped moving. "That ice makes the roof deadly. Please let me help." Just as he said it, her foot slipped. For a heart-stopping second, she was airborne. Then his hands were there. He'd scaled the ladder in 3 quick movements, his grip strong and sure, steadying her before she could fall. "I'm fine," she gasped, but her voice was shaking. "I'm sure you are," he said, his body close enough for her to feel his warmth. He positioned himself below her on the roof, a human safety net. "But humor me. My mother raised me to be helpful to ladies, and she'd box my ears if she knew I let a pregnant woman work alone on an icy roof." They fell into an easy rhythm after that. His presence made the work feel lighter. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, his voice a warm counterpoint to the biting wind. Willa found herself smiling. She hadn't smiled in months. "You know," he said as they sat on the edge of the roof, sharing a canteen of water. "My mother's been asking about you. She sent these." He pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag, knitted baby clothes, soft and warm, and a tin of medicinal tea. "She also invited you to Sunday dinner," he added, almost as an afterthought, "though I told her you'd probably say no." The idea of it, a warm house, a family meal, sent a pang of longing through her so sharp it was painful, but it was followed by a familiar chill. "I don't need charity," she said, her voice tight. "It's not charity, it's neighborliness." "Is there a difference?" she snapped. "In my experience, people rarely offer help without expecting something in return." His easy smile vanished. His expression grew serious, his dark eyes searching her face. "What happened to you, Willa? What made you so afraid of simple kindness?" The question was a direct hit. It brought it all rushing back. Charles, whispering promises he never meant to keep. Her father's business partner, offering to help with her inheritance right before he stole it. Her own mother's love, a thing that was always given with conditions attached. Trust was a fool's game. She'd learned that the hard way. "I'm not afraid," she lied. "I'm practical. Independence is safer than obligation." "That's not living," he said softly. "That's just surviving." They finished the roof in silence, but it wasn't an angry silence. It was a thoughtful one. She watched his hands as he worked. They were strong and capable. For a rich man's son, he knew his way around a hammer. As the winter deepened, so did their strange friendship. He brought her supplies she didn't ask for but desperately needed. He helped her chop a mountain of firewood. He never stayed too long, never pushed too hard. He was just there. Slowly, brick by brick, he was tearing down the walls she had so carefully built around her heart. One afternoon, another rider appeared. An older woman with Hob's kind eyes and a warm smile. Janie Ruth Ransom. She came bearing a basket of fresh-baked bread and stew that smelled like heaven. She didn't pry or ask nosy questions. She just looked at Willa, at the cabin, at the life she was carving out of nothing, and she understood. "You're building something remarkable here," Janie Ruth said, her voice full of genuine admiration. Not just the cabin, all of it. It takes a rare kind of courage. That maternal warmth was a balm on a wound Willa didn't even know she had. For the first time since she'd fled Boston, she felt the dangerous, seductive pull of belonging. But something else was happening too, something she was trying very hard to ignore. She noticed the way Hob's eyes would linger on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his hand would brush against hers, the touch lasting just a second too long. The way he said her name, a soft caress of a sound that made her pulse jump. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was falling in love with him, and he was falling in love with her. She could see it in the way he looked at her, hear it in the way he talked about the spring, as if he was already planning a future that included her. A future that included her baby. Her secret, her marriage, burned hotter than ever. It was a lie that was growing more poisonous with every passing day. Hob had told her about his fiancée, Victoria Morrison, a suitable match arranged by his father. But lately, he spoke of it like it was a death sentence. A cage he was desperate to escape. One evening, they were sitting by her fireplace. The cabin was warm and cozy, the world outside a frozen wasteland. He was looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Willa," he said, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something. About Victoria, about my father, about what I want." His hand reached for hers across the small space between them, but before he could say another word, a sound cut through the howl of the wind. Horses, multiple riders moving fast. Willa's blood turned to ice. She knew that sound. It was the sound of authority, the sound of men who were not there to be neighborly. She scrambled to the window and peered out into the swirling snow. Torches flickered in the darkness, throwing monstrous shadows against the trees. And then she heard a voice she had prayed she would never hear again, a voice that made her soul freeze solid in her chest. "Mrs. Charles Whitmore, we know you're in there. We have legal documents that require your immediate attention." Charles. He had found her, and he was about to burn her new world to the ground. The men at her door looked like they'd stepped out of two different worlds. One was a local sheriff's deputy, his face etched with reluctance. The other was a Boston lawyer, his expensive wool coat a joke in the face of the Montana wilderness. But it was the third man who made the air leave Willa's lungs. Charles Whitmore, her husband. Standing on the porch of the cabin she built with her own hands, his lips curled into that familiar, cruel sneer. "Mrs. Whitmore," the lawyer said, his voice slick and polished, "I'm afraid there are some legal matters that require your immediate attention." Hobbs stepped in front of her, a protective wall of muscle and fury. His hand drifted instinctively toward the pistol on his hip. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but you seem to be mistaken. This is Miss Doreen's property, and she's not expecting visitors." Charles let out a short, ugly laugh, a sound like a boot grinding on glass. "Miss Doreen? How charming! Tell me, darling, what other lies have you told your handsome cowboy?" The floor seemed to drop out from under Willa. The weight of her secret came crashing down, an avalanche of deceit, burying her, burying everything. Hobbs' head whipped around. His eyes searched her face, a storm of confusion and a terrible, dawning horror warring in his expression. "Willa!" His voice was a bare whisper. "What is he talking about?" "You didn't tell him?" Charles's voice dripped with fake sympathy. He was enjoying this, savoring every second of her humiliation. "How unfortunate. Allow me to make the introduction. Mr. Ransom, this is my wife, Mrs. Charles Whitmore of Boston, still legally married, I might add, despite her little adventure in playing pioneer." The color drained from Hobbs' face. He looked like he'd been gut-punched. "Wife?" "I can explain," Willa choked out. but her throat was raw, tight with unshed tears. "Oh, this should be delicious," Charles cut in, his eyes glittering. "Please do explain. Explain to your lover how you've been living a lie. Tell him about the divorce papers you refused to sign. Tell him about the child you're carrying. That isn't his. And while you're at it, tell him about the considerable debts you've racked up, debts that are now, legally, my responsibility. The child is yours." Willa's voice was a raw cry. "You know it's yours." "What I know," Charles said, his voice dropping to a glacial calm, "is that you have made a mockery of our marriage and our family name. But I'm prepared to be generous. Sign these papers, return to Boston with me, and we'll arrange for the child to be placed with a suitable family. You can resume your proper place in society. We'll all just forget this unfortunate little episode ever happened." "Get off her property." Hob's voice was a low growl, vibrating with a violence that startled Willa. "I'm afraid that's not possible," the lawyer interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Whitmore has outstanding legal obligations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Until they are resolved, she cannot remain here." "What obligations?" Hob demanded, his eyes blazing. Charles smiled, a triumphant, predatory flash of teeth. "Debts, Mr. Ransom, debts incurred in my name, property damaged in her hasty departure, and most significantly, a flagrant violation of the terms of our marriage contract. You see, my wife is quite the expensive commodity. This little cabin fantasy of hers has cost me a great deal of money and reputation." The lies were a poison, seeping into the warm air of the cabin, tainting everything. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to kill the fragile hope that had begun to grow between her and Hob. She watched his face. She saw the moment the poison took hold, the moment doubt flickered in his eyes. Her silence was damning him, confirming every accusation. "Is any of this true?" Hob asked. His voice was hollow, empty. Willa's heart shattered into a million pieces. "Some of it," she whispered. I am still legally married. He never finalized the divorce, but the rest is immaterial." Charles's voice cracked like a whip. "The fact remains, Mr. Ransom, that you have been living in adultery with a married woman. I'm sure your father would be very interested to hear about that. A scandal of this magnitude. It could be very damaging to the family business, don't you think?" The threat hung in the air, a hangman's noose. She saw Hob's jaw tighten. She could see the calculation in his eyes, his family's name, his father's empire, his own future. All of it, balanced on the edge of a knife. Everything she had ever feared about depending on someone else, about trusting someone else, was coming true in the most brutal way imaginable. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice flat, defeated. "No." Hob's voice was firm. He took a step toward her. "Willa, whatever this is, we can work it out. You don't have to go back to him." "But I do," she said, and now the tears were streaming down her face, hot and unstoppable. "Don't you see? I've already ruined you. If you fight this, Charles will destroy your family. Your engagement, your business, everything. He'll burn it all to the ground just to punish me. I don't care about any of that. But I do." Her voice broke. "I care about you too much to let my mistakes destroy your life. I came here to start over, but my past followed me. I should have known. You can't build something new on a rotten foundation. So you're just going to give up? Walk away from this?" He gestured around the cabin, the home she had bled for. "I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Face the consequences of my own choices, alone." Charles stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with victory. "How very noble. Come along, darling. Let's return to civilization." But as she walked toward the door, a ghost in her own home, Hob caught her arm. His grip was gentle but firm. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and intense, for her ears only. "I will find a way, legal or otherwise." Please don't, she begged, her heart breaking all over again. For both our sakes, just let me go. The last thing she saw was his face. Standing in the doorway of her cabin, framed by the warm light, his expression a mask of pain and a fierce determination that terrified her more than any of Charles's threats. Because she knew Hob Ransom. He was the kind of man who would fight to the death for what he believed in, and she loved him too much to let him die on that hill for her. The wagon lurched forward, carrying her back into the darkness. She pressed a hand to her belly, a silent promise to the child inside. I will get us free. Somehow. Some way. But first, she had to survive whatever fresh hell Charles had waiting for her in Boston. The Boston townhouse was a tomb. After the vast, endless sky of Montana, the walls felt like they were closing in, squeezing the very breath from her lungs. The sunlight that filtered through the heavy lace curtains was pale and weak, a sick imitation of the real thing. Charles had told everyone she'd had a breakdown, a bout of female hysteria. He was keeping her confined for her own good, of course, for her recovery. But the locks on the doors and the stony-faced woman who watched her every move told a different story. She wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner. Really, Willa, her mother-in-law, Callie May, said, perched on a stiff horsehair sofa like a vulture on a branch. Her voice was a thin, reedy whine. You must see how your little adventure has embarrassed the family. Running off to play pioneer while carrying Charles's child? It's beyond scandalous. Willa's hand went to her belly. The baby was a constant, solid presence, a secret anchor in this suffocating world. The child is a Whitmore, Charles said from the doorway. He didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. His authority was a cold, heavy blanket that smothered everything. And it will be raised as a Whitmore, with a proper education and suitable connections. A chill snaked its way down Willa's spine. What exactly does that mean? Charles's smile didn't reach his eyes. They were as cold and dead as a winter lake. It means, my dear, that you will sign these papers. You'll relinquish your parental rights. We'll arrange for the child to be placed with a more stable family. A family capable of providing the guidance it will need. He held out a sheaf of papers. After that, he continued, his voice dangerously pleasant, you will be admitted to a private sanitarium for treatment of your obvious mental instability. The papers felt like a death sentence in her hands. She scanned the dense legal text, her father's business lessons kicking in despite the fog of despair. It was a perfect trap. By signing, she would not only lose her child forever, she would be declared mentally incompetent. Charles would have complete control over her, her inheritance, her entire life. I won't sign, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Oh, you will, Charles replied, his pleasant tone making the threat even more terrifying. Because if you don't, I will make good on my promise. Your cowboy lover will face criminal charges, adultery, corruption of a married woman. The Montana Territory takes a very dim view of such things. The Ransom family name won't survive the scandal. I will personally see to it. The threat wasn't a bluff. In the long, empty days of her confinement, she'd found a law book in the library. He was right. He could destroy Hob. He could ruin his family, his future, everything he held dear. All with a word. You're despicable, she whispered. I'm practical, he corrected. You made your bed when you ran away to play house with a ranch hand. Now you'll lie in it. That night, she lay in her old canopy bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city. A sound she'd once found comforting, but now it just sounded like a cage rattling its bars. She was defeated, broken. There was no way out. And then something slid under her door, a single plain envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter inside was postmarked from Montana. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, and strong. But the words were a spark in the darkness. Mrs. Whitmore, I am writing at the request of my son, Hob Ransom. He has asked me to convey some information he believes you should know. The territorial legislature has recently passed new laws regarding marriage and divorce. There may be legal remedies available to you now that were not before. More importantly, Hob has retained attorneys in both Boston and Montana. They are prepared to challenge your husband's claims. But that is not the most important thing he asked me to tell you. He asked me to tell you that your cabin is still standing, that he has been keeping the fire lit. He asked me to tell you that he is prepared to wait as long as it takes. He said to tell you that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The choice, of course, is yours, but you should know that you are not as alone as you might believe. Respectfully, Janie Ruth Ransom. But there was another piece of paper folded inside the letter, a small handwritten note. P.S. Hob also discovered something else. Charles Whitmore's shipping business is in serious trouble. He is deeply in debt to men who are not forgiving. He has been moving money, trying to hide his assets. Some of that money, we believe, belongs to partners of my husband. Charles is not a powerful man playing games. He is a desperate animal caught in a trap of his own making. That desperation makes him dangerous, but it also makes him vulnerable. Willa read the letter and then the note again and again. Hope. It was a dangerous, intoxicating thing, a poison and a cure all at once. Charles wasn't in control. He was bluffing. He was a cornered rat. Escape had seemed impossible. Charles had taken her money, her papers, even her clothes. The house was a fortress, her every move watched. But now, she had a reason. She had a weapon. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the strong, reassuring kick of her baby. A fire she thought had been extinguished roared back to life in her chest. If the law couldn't free her, she would free herself. The proper Boston lady she used to be would have fainted at the thought. But that woman was dead and buried under a pile of pine shavings and river stones in Montana. The woman who was left was a fighter. Charles had made one critical mistake. He thought he had broken her. He had forgotten that she was the woman who had built a house with her own 2 hands, and that mistake was going to cost him everything. The escape happened on a night the wind howled through Boston like a banshee, rattling the window panes and tearing at the slate roofs. Willa had been praying for a storm to cover her tracks, to mask the sound of her flight. For weeks she had planned, every guard's patrol schedule, every creaky floorboard, every unlocked pantry window was a detail in her mental blueprint. She'd used a piece of her hidden jewelry to bribe a young, sympathetic housemaid, a girl who knew a thing or two about being trapped. The girl, Mary, had smuggled out a message to the Boston lawyers Janie Ruth had mentioned. And she'd smuggled in a small bundle, a boy's rough-spun clothes, a cap, and a sturdy pair of boots. She faked a fever, the moans and shivers convincing enough to keep even Callie May at a distance. Then, in the deepest hour of the night, when the storm was at its peak, she slipped out. A ghost in her own gilded cage. The journey west was a fever dream. Lurching train cars, the constant fear of discovery, the gnawing anxiety that she was running out of time. Her pregnancy was obvious now, drawing curious, sometimes pitying, glances from other passengers. She kept the cap pulled low, her face turned to the window, watching the country blur by. With every mile that separated her from Boston, she felt a knot inside her chest loosen. She could breathe again. The air tasted different out here. It tasted like freedom. She finally arrived in Willow Creek as the first real snow of the season began to fall, thick, heavy flakes that promised to shut down the world. She was bone-weary, every muscle aching, but her spirit was soaring. She made her way to the livery stable. The owner, a leathery old man named Tobin Clay, took one look at her, and his eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Dorine," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. Lord have mercy. Mr. Ransom's been checking the stage every single day for weeks. Said he had a feeling you'd be coming back. His gaze dropped to her belly, his expression one of a man who'd seen enough of life not to be surprised by any of it. Reckon you'll be needin' a wagon to get out to your place. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And Mr. Clay, my name is Willa. Just Willa. The cabin looked exactly as she had left it. A warm, welcoming light glowed in the window. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney, a signal in the twilight. Someone had been keeping it alive for her. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed open the door. She didn't know what she would find. A part of her was terrified that he'd given up, that he'd finally listened to reason and gone back to his sensible fiancée. But the cabin was empty. A fire crackled in the hearth. A pot of stew sat warming on the hob. He had been here. He was close. Then she heard it, the rhythmic thwack of an axe splitting wood. She walked around the back of the cabin. And there he was, his back to her, sleeves rolled up, swinging the axe with a clean, powerful motion. When he turned and saw her standing there, the axe simply fell from his hands. It landed softly in the fresh snow. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other across the clearing. Two people who had been to hell and back and had somehow, impossibly, found their way back to this one small spot on the earth. You came back, he finally said. His voice was rough, choked with an emotion he couldn't hide. I had to, she whispered. This is my home. She started toward him, each step feeling like it took a monumental effort. Hob, I have to tell you everything. About Charles, the divorce, the lies. It doesn't matter, he interrupted, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He stopped just short of touching her. None of it matters, except that you're here. But it does matter. I lied to you. I let you fall in love with a fiction. I didn't fall in love with a fiction, he said, his voice fierce. I fell in love with the woman who built this cabin with her bare hands. I fell in love with your strength, your courage, your refusal to let anyone else tell you who you are. The rest is just paperwork. We can sort out the paperwork. He reached out then, his calloused hands cupping her face. His touch was so gentle, so full of a tenderness she had only dreamed of. I love you, Willa, he said, his eyes searching hers. Not your past, not your legal status. I love you, exactly as you are. The words she had been so terrified to hope for washed over her, a warm, healing rain. I love you too, she cried, the tears finally coming. That's why I left. I couldn't let them destroy you. Then let's uncomplicate things, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. My lawyers have been busy. The territorial courts can grant you a divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. Charles trying to lock you up in Boston? That just makes your case stronger. As for his threats against me, let him try. The truth about Charles Whitmore is starting to come out. His whole rotten empire is about to come crashing down. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let her go. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine smoke and winter air and him. She was safe. She was home. But as he held her, a sudden sharp pain tightened across her lower back. It took her breath away. She'd been feeling it on and off for days, blaming it on the stress and the long train ride. But this was different. This was stronger, sharper. Hob, she gasped, her voice suddenly strained. I think the baby's coming. His face went white. Now? But you're not due for another month. Babies, she grunted, as another more powerful contraction seized her. Don't always follow schedules. She doubled over, gripping his arms. We need to get you to the doctor in town, he said, panic creeping into his voice. But as he helped her toward the cabin, they both looked up at the sky. The snow was no longer falling in gentle flakes. It was a blinding, horizontal blizzard. The storm that had helped her escape was now their jailer. The road to town would be impassable within minutes. "I can do it," Hob said, his voice shaking slightly but his eyes determined. "I can deliver the baby. I've helped birth dozens of foals and calves. The principle's the same." "That's not exactly reassuring," Willa gasped as another wave of pain crashed over her. He half-carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the raging storm. He settled her by the fire, his movements suddenly calm and focused. This was it. Not in a sterile Boston hospital, surrounded by strangers, but here, in the cabin she built, with the man who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The baby was coming, ready or not, and as the storm howled its fury outside, Willa felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The baby arrived just as the storm broke and the first pale light of dawn crept over the snow-covered mountains. Her cry was a fierce, healthy thing, a defiant shout in the quiet aftermath of the wind. Willa held her daughter, her heart overflowing. She stared at the tiny, perfect fingers, the fuzz of dark hair, the way the baby's cries stopped the instant she heard her mother's voice. She was a miracle. "She's beautiful," Hob whispered. He sat beside them on the bed, looking utterly exhausted and completely awestruck. He gently traced the baby's cheek with one calloused finger. "She looks just like you. She looks like herself," Willa corrected, but she was smiling. "What should we name her?" he asked. "Hope," Willa said, the name coming to her lips as if it had been waiting there all along. "For what she is. For what we're building. Hob Ransom." Hob tried the name out. It sounded right. No, not quite. Willadorine, he corrected himself. A new name for a new life, a name that belonged to them, not to the ghosts of Boston. Their peace lasted for 3 days, 3 perfect snowbound days of learning how to be a family. Then, on the 4th day, riders appeared in the clearing. It wasn't Charles. It was something far more complicated, and potentially far more dangerous. Victoria Morrison, her beautiful face a mask of cold fury. Her father, a man whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance, and behind them, his face grim and unforgiving, was Hob's own father, Elmer Cade Ransom. "Hobart!" Elmer's voice boomed across the snow, each word a hammer blow. He dismounted heavily, his eyes sweeping over the small cabin with unconcealed disgust. "This foolishness has gone on long enough. You have compromised not just your own future, but the reputation of this entire family. It is time to come home and honor your commitments." Victoria stepped forward, her silk dress absurd in the rustic setting, but her eyes were as hard and cold as winter ice. "I have been patient, Hob. I have endured the whispers, the humiliation. But my patience has its limits. You have made me a laughingstock." "Then marry someone else, Victoria," Hob said. His voice was calm, steady. He stood on the porch, his arm resting protectively on Willa's shoulder as she held the sleeping baby. "My commitment is here." "Here?" Victoria's laugh was a brittle, ugly sound. "With a runaway wife? And another man's bastard child? How romantic, and how very temporary. What happens when the novelty wears off? When the hardship and the isolation become too much to bear? Where will you be then?" "Right here," Willa said, her voice shaking but clear. She would not be silent, not anymore. "This is our home, our family, our choice." "Your family?" Victoria sneered. "You're still legally married to Charles Whitmore. This child is illegitimate, and you are living in sin with a man who was promised to me." "The divorce papers were finalized yesterday," Hob said quietly. The words dropped into the frozen air like stones into a silent pond. "While you were recovering," he continued, his eyes locked on Willa's, "I rode to the territorial courthouse. I had the lawyer's documents. The judge granted the decree based on abandonment and cruelty. "It's done, Willa. You're free." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. Raw, ugly fury twisted her perfect features. "You've destroyed everything!" she shrieked, her voice shaking with rage. "Your inheritance, your family's good name, your entire future. For what? For this shack in the wilderness, and a woman who has proven she can't be trusted by anyone?" "I haven't destroyed my future," Hob replied, his voice ringing with a certainty that was unshakable. "I've chosen it, with my eyes wide open." Elmer Cade Ransom's face was like granite. "Then you have chosen to do it without the Ransom name, and without the Ransom fortune. As of this moment, you are no son of mine." The words were meant to be a fatal blow, but Hob didn't even flinch. "If the price of your approval is giving up the woman I love, then it's a price I'll gladly pay." "You'll be back," Victoria hissed, her voice full of the absolute certainty of a person who has never been denied anything in her life. "When the winter closes in, when you're starving and alone, when this grand romance fades into the daily drudgery of survival, you'll remember what you gave up, and you will come crawling back." "Maybe," Hob said, a small smile playing on his lips. "But I'll also remember what I gained." He turned his back on them, on the fortune, on the life he was supposed to want, and walked back into the cabin, closing the door on his past. Later that night, they sat by the fire. Baby Hope slept peacefully in a cradle Hob had carved. The weight of their choice settled around them, heavy but warm, like a handmade quilt. They had traded security for freedom, acceptance for love. "Do you regret it?" Willa asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hob looked at her, his eyes glowing in the firelight. "No," he said without a moment's hesitation. "My father built an empire on deals and obligations and what other people expected of him. I want to build something different, something that belongs only to us." That spring, they planted their first garden. Hope gurgled in a basket nearby, watching them turn the rocky soil. The vegetables they grew that summer tasted sweeter than anything Willa had ever eaten in Boston. They were seasoned with sweat and satisfaction and the quiet joy of a shared life. They were no longer the wealthy rancher's son and the disgraced Boston wife. They were just Hob and Willa, building a life, raising a daughter, choosing each other, day after day. The whispers in town didn't stop overnight. The respectable families still looked through them at church, but they held their heads high. They had found something more valuable than social standing. They had found a love that had survived scandal and exile and had come out the other side, stronger and truer than ever. The cabin in the wilderness was more than a home. It was a monument, a testament to the power of courage over comfort, of truth over lies. As the years passed, the whispers faded. 5 years, 10. The small homestead grew. The single cabin sprouted new rooms, a sturdy barn, fences that stretched across the valley. 2 sons, James and Samuel, followed Hope, their laughter filling the mountain air. The hard work never stopped, but it was good work, honest work. They became known for their integrity, for the quality of their livestock, for their willingness to help a neighbor in need. Respect, they learned, was not something you could inherit. It was something you had to build, day by day, just like a cabin. One day, a letter arrived with a Boston postmark. It was from Janie Ruth Ransom. Elmer had passed away in his sleep. In his will, he had left the entirety of the Ransom fortune, the Circle R ranch, everything, to his only son, Hobart. They stood on the porch of their cabin, the letter in Hob's hand, and looked out at the life they had built, the life they had chosen. "What will we do?" Willa asked. Hob looked at her, at his children playing in the yard, at the mountains that had witnessed their whole story. He smiled, that same slow, steady smile that had first made her heart skip a beat. "I think," he said, tearing the letter in half and letting the pieces drift away on the wind, "that we have everything we need right here." Their love story wasn't written in legal documents or society pages. It was written in the lines on their hands, in the foundations of their home, in the faces of their children. It was a story of a love that was worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this story, and you believe that some things are worth fighting for, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of courage, survival, and the things that truly matter.